Welcome to a new part on the use of the Tomahawk in combat. Today I wanted to start first with a question which came up during our training class, and that is about what training tools can I use for Tomahawk or hand axe combat. So the right answer is you should use different tools for different purposes. When you fence with broadsword or saber, of course, a good answer is to have a blunt HEMA-bladed steel saber or backsword. Of course, this is a very good training weapon, and for a lot of drilling with a lot of blade-on-blade contact, I of course would recommend the Black Fencer backswords. Now, these are two very safe training tools where you can train realistically with full impact if you have protective gear in sparring and also when you do some kind of contact training. With the Tomahawk you always have to be very careful, because it is an impact tool which creates a lot of power on a small blade with a heavy axe head. And therefore the danger of injuring yourself during training, during practice, and especially during sparring is quite high. However, the first thing I would recommend is of course a real Tomahawk. This has not to be sharp, it can also be a blunt one for safety reasons, but I would only use this for solo training. Of course, I know there are people who do Huska, reenactment, battlefield combat with Viking stuff and Norman stuff and things like that, and they use blunt axes and hand axes as well. However, they follow a specific rule set as far as I know, and also they have very good protective gear, especially for their hands. And the same goes of course for the HMB, the medieval armored combat leagues, which are in full armor, very well protected, and they can, knock each other out with blows from their maces and axes. But if I want to train with a Tomahawk as in the context of the use of the Tomahawk, so this is unarmored combat, and therefore I have to be responsible and think about what level of force I want to use and in what context I train. So a steel Tomahawk I would use for realistic solo training. So if you're training the techniques on your own, I would use, and I use, a steel Tomahawk, because now I have the right weight, the right balance, because all other safer tools lack this correct balance. And if you are always training with training Tomahawks made of, like of rubber or plastic or something like that, then of course you will create bad habits, because you're thinking, oh yes, this is smooth, this is quick like a knife and whatnot. But the reality is different. So solo practice, I would say, always do with a steel Tomahawk to save yourself or others. If you train inside a hall, inside a dojo, inside a gym with other people, I would say don't take a sharp one, or at least if you have a sharp one, then with a good leather padding, leather sheath, so you don't hurt someone or yourself accidentally. So a reenactment hand axe, which are quite affordable, is also a good solution for solo practice with a Tomahawk. Available everywhere on the market online is of course the Code Steel training axe. This one is the Poly PP whatever Chinese X Gang Hatchet. So this is based on their model, which they have as a sharp one, as a real one. So can I recommend these? I would say yes and no. First of all, for free fighting and sparring, these are way too dangerous. This is quite pointy, this is quite narrow. You have, sharp edges, or not edges, sharp parts here. So you can injure someone quite easy with that. Also, the impact of these is quite brutal. So you cannot do full force sparring with that unless you would wear kind of steel armor. At least that is my opinion. So you can use them, however, for solo training if you want to have an affordable training tool, which is still not as heavy as a real one. or you can do them, use them for partner drills. But even with partner drills, I would say be careful, because if you train, you know, like these parries and this slides down and hits your hand, I would still wear some padded gloves when I use these for training. And even with tiny snap cuts and a little bit of impact, so this is realistic, to be honest, because if I use this one and use a tiny snap cut, of course this will hurt as hell if I cut your fingers, or it will break your fingers and whatnot. So this is kind of realistic. So the weight, of course, is not as heavy or axe head balanced like the real one. However, it is still heavy enough to train realistically with it and still be a little bit safer. So I would say if you use them, don't use them in sparring. For that, I think they are too heavy, and also their impact is a little bit too hard. But for training purposes, you can use them. And also what is quite nice for demonstrations is that they look like, you know, they are made with wooden shaft and real axe head. So they don't look like training tools from far, they look like the real thing. So that is not too bad for different purposes. They are quite affordable. So yeah, why not? I'm not really a big fan of them, but they have their place in training, so you can take them. But as I said, with being really careful, and I would not do sparring with them. What you see quite often in the Tomahawk community, people using the Tomahawk, are these ones. These are the cold steel trench hawk training Tomahawk. So they have this kind of what they call a trench hawk model, and basing on this they made a training version. So this has a plastic handle, and this is also kind of a plastic. It's a little bit more flexible like the handle, but not too much. So it is not a flexible rubber blade. Normally it has a spike back here, like the trench hawk, but I wanted to have only a hammerhead like with this one. So I wanted to make it like this, and I have to say, of course, spike tomahawks, small boarding axes and hatchets with a spike here on the back have their place, of course, in history. They were used and people like them. I personally prefer something with a hammerhead for different reasons. So I'm not a big fan of the spike for my personal, especially if it is a very long spike, and the spike on the training Tomahawk was like this. So that was too long for my personal taste. I changed that, I padded, you know, cut it down here, padded it a little bit with tape, and now I have more like a Tomahawk. So now, how good are they as a training tool? I would say they are very good. Of course, taken with a pinch of salt, because again, they are as top heavy as the steel one. Of course, they are less top heavy and heavy like the Chinese X-Gang trainer Hatchet, but therefore they are quite safe, and they have a realistic, nice Tomahawk shaped blade. So when you do all the hooking motions, these are quite nice. Also, in my opinion, they are safe enough to do sparring. However, still with some control, because even, I don't have it here, we had it back then, there is a Tomahawk trainer made by Purple Heart Armory. You know, Purple Heart Armory makes also plastic weapons, and they have a kind of a sax knife, and they have a Highland dirk, which we also are using, which are okay, which are good for training, affordable training tools. They also have a Tomahawk. We had this, you saw this in other videos where we were using it in sparring. It is quite safe because it is very light, but it is too light, and I didn't like the handle. The handle was quite short. I think it ended like here. So this was a really short Tomahawk, and this is something I didn't like. I like a Tomahawk which has at least kind of this length, and as you can see, I modified my Condor Tomahawk into a longer handled version. So this is my personal taste, but I think a good Tomahawk, at least in my opinion, should have kind of this dirk length, so alongside the forearm, and especially if you want to use it, as I showed you in the last videos, like this, then of course this is it is important that it is not too short. However, the Purple Heart Armory Tomahawk still had enough impact. So if you hit someone on the fingers with a short snap cut, it still hurts like hell, because it is an axe head, it is axe shaped, so it transfers a lot of power into that small blade, and if you get a whack on your finger, it just hurts, okay? It's a good impact tool. That is what an axe was made for, and therefore Obviously, this can also hurt like hell. The Purple Heart Armory ones and the Cold Steel ones as well. However, with a little bit of control and good protective gear, especially for your hands, you can use these in sparring. The downside is if you only use these for Tomahawk training, then, especially in solo training, then you get used to bad habits because like, oh, this weight's like nothing. I can wield it around all day and it just reacts like I want it. And then you take this one in your hand and like, oh man, this is quite of heavy. Okay, so yeah, definitely my recommendation as a partner drill and sparring tool for solo practice, go for a steel one, in my opinion. Finally, your do-it-yourself homemade Tomahawk trainer, which is the first Tomahawk trainer I did, not this one, but similar ones with rattans. You can use like a rattan stick from a screamer, and then you take some foam, harder foam, like swimming boards, or I used kind of a craftsman board where you can kneel on, which is made of harder foam or harder rubber. It is a wooden handle, some harder foam, rubber, whatever, and lots of duct tape. And the more duct tape you use, the top heavier it gets and the more padded it is. It is quite safe. Still, again, it still has a lot of impact, okay? However, it is of course not as bad as this one, and even not as bad as this one. Still, it can create some impact, but not as much, of course. It's softer and it's a broader surface where you are hitting. Downside, of course, downside is it is very, very light. So this is, of course, not a real training tool, and you start to create, if you use this too much, you start to create, yeah, not very good habits when you're using the real thing later. This is also a good solution if you want to start with a Tomahawk with maybe a bigger group, and you can just make like a little do-it-yourself course and make very, very affordable training Tomahawks for a bigger group. So this is also kind of a possibility. So my favorites are, of course, the trench shot, which I mentioned before, the Cold Steel trench shot, and for solo training, as of course the real one, the steel one. So yeah, this is my opinion on training tools for the Tomahawk. There are, I think, also other companies which are making training Tomahawks out there, and especially in the USA. I only could talk about the ones I know, so here's my opinion on that. And again, a little word of warning: if you train with a Tomahawk, keep in mind the impact of the axe head, even with the training Tomahawk, can be very hard. So you should always wear some kind of hand protection to make sure that you're not get injured during training. Okay, next thing on the list for this video is that I will show you, as promised, some partner drills. These are first just some examples of some techniques with a little bit of description, and maybe in future we'll do more of detailed partner drills and also solo drills videos for you. So yeah, hope you enjoy this, and then see you in the next video.